Should have met me before you met my... Oh. I almost said Martha.
Listen up, because in 1951, a red-headed comedian and her Cuban husband created something that had never existed before on American television. They invented the modern sitcom. I am talking about I Love Lucy, the show that 72% of all television viewers watched every single week. More people watched Lucy give birth than watched the presidential inauguration the very next day. But here is the thing that nobody wants to talk about. I Love Lucy did not get canceled. It did not fade away. Lucille Ball killed it herself while it was still the #1 show in America, and she did it to escape a nightmare happening behind the scenes. Before we dive into video, please subscribe to our channel. So in this video, I am going to walk you through the entire rise and fall of I Love Lucy from its impossible beginning in 1951 to the heartbreaking decision that ended it all in 1957. And I am not just talking about what happened on camera. I am talking about the real marriage that was falling apart while America watched the fake one and laughed. The drinking and the fights and the betrayals that Lucy hid from the world until she could not hide them anymore. We're going to answer 3 burning questions that fans have wondered about for decades. First, how did Lucille Ball convince a network that did not want her to create the most watched show in television history? Second, what was really happening between Lucy and Desi when the cameras stopped rolling that made the show impossible to continue? And third, why did Lucy walk away from guaranteed success when she could have kept going forever? But first, let me give you some context on just how massive this thing was at its peak. Because if you think you understand how popular I Love Lucy was, you are probably still underestimating it. Part 1. The Rise. So here's how I Love Lucy went from a risky experiment to the most dominant show in television history. And this is crucial to understanding everything that came after. In 1951, most television shows were broadcast live from New York City. The technology for recording and distributing shows across the country was primitive. If you lived on the West Coast, you watched a kinescope, which was basically a film recording of a television screen. The quality was terrible. Lucy and Desi refused to move to New York. They wanted to stay in Hollywood, but they also wanted the show to look professional, so they made a decision that would revolutionize the entire industry. They would film the show on 35mm film, real movie quality film. They would shoot in front of a live studio audience to get genuine laughs and reactions. And they would use 3 cameras simultaneously to capture different angles. Nobody had ever done this before. The network said it would be too expensive. So Lucy and Desi made a deal. They would take a pay cut to cover the extra production costs. In exchange, they would own the filmed episodes outright. CBS thought this was a great deal for them. They were wrong. That ownership clause would eventually make Lucy and Desi among the wealthiest people in Hollywood through syndication rights that are still generating money today. They set up their production company called Desi and hired a genius cinematographer named Carl Freund, who had worked on classic films like Metropolis. Freund figured out how to light a set for 3 cameras at once. He invented techniques that are still used in sitcom production today. Everything about I Love Lucy was being created from scratch, because nothing like it had ever existed. The show premiered on October 15, 1951, and the response was immediate. Audiences fell in love with Lucy Ricardo, the scheming housewife who desperately wanted to break into show business. They fell in love with Ricky Ricardo, the Cuban band leader who loved his wife but could never control her. They fell in love with Fred and Ethel Mertz, the landlords and best friends played by William Frawley and Vivian Vance. The formula was simple but perfect. Every episode, Lucy would cook up some scheme. Usually it involved trying to get into Ricky's nightclub act, or making money, or becoming famous. The scheme would spiral out of control. Lucy would end up in some ridiculous situation. Ricky would find out and yell at her in Spanish, and somehow by the end of the episode, everything would be forgiven because underneath all the chaos was genuine love. By the end of the first season, I Love Lucy was the #1 show in America, and it was not close. The ratings were unlike anything television had ever seen. Department stores changed their hours so employees could watch. Movie theaters reported lower attendance on Monday nights. Marshall Field's department store in Chicago put a sign in their window that said, "We love Lucy too, so we're closing on Monday nights." Let me give you some numbers to understand how dominant this show became. At its peak, I Love Lucy was watched by 67.3 million viewers in a country of 160 million people. That is nearly half the entire American population watching a single television show. Those numbers would be impossible to achieve today with our fragmented media landscape. And then something happened in 1952 that had never happened on American television before. Lucille Ball got pregnant, in real life and on the show. Now you have to understand how radical this was. Television networks would not even say the word pregnant on air. It was considered vulgar and inappropriate. Married couples on TV slept in separate beds. The idea of showing a woman's pregnancy was completely taboo. CBS was terrified, but Lucy and Desi insisted on incorporating the pregnancy into the show. They worked with a priest and a rabbi and a minister to approve every script. They called the baby an expected child instead of using the word pregnant. And on January 19, 1953, the episode where Lucy Ricardo gave birth aired on CBS, the same night that Lucille Ball gave birth to Desi Arnaz Jr. in real life. 271.7 million people watched that episode. To put that in perspective, only 29 million people watched the inauguration of President Eisenhower the very next day. A sitcom about a woman having a baby drew more than twice the audience of a presidential inauguration. That had never happened before, and it will never happen again. The show continued to dominate for the next 4 years. It finished number 1 in the ratings for 4 of its 6 seasons. The Ricardos and the Mertzes went on trips to Hollywood and Europe. They moved to the country. They had adventures and mishaps and misunderstandings. The formula never got old because the performances were so good and the writing was so sharp. But here's the thing about reaching that kind of success. The pressure becomes unbearable. And behind the scenes of America's Happiest Marriage, a very different story was unfolding. Part 2. The marriage nobody saw. Alright, so this is where the story gets really dark, because the fall of I Love Lucy did not happen on screen. It happened in the Arnaz home when the cameras were off and the audience was gone. From almost the very beginning of their relationship, Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz had problems that the public never knew about. Desi had a drinking problem. It was serious, and it got worse over the years. When he drank, he became a different person. He became angry and unreliable and cruel. The charming band leader that America loved would disappear, and something uglier would take his place. There were also affairs. Desi was not faithful to Lucy, and she knew it. He spent time with other women, and he did not try very hard to hide it. The rumors circulated in Hollywood for years. Lucy heard them all. She lived with the humiliation of knowing that while America watched her happy television marriage, her real marriage was being destroyed by betrayal. Now here's the complicated part. The show was supposed to save their marriage. That was the whole reason Lucy insisted on doing it together. She believed that if they worked side by side every day, they would grow closer. They would become partners. The problems would fade away. For a while, it seemed to work. The first few seasons of I Love Lucy were also the strongest years of their marriage. They were building something together. They were becoming wealthy beyond their dreams. They had 2 beautiful children. Desi was too busy running Desilu Productions to get into too much trouble, but success brought its own problems. Desilu became one of the biggest production companies in Hollywood. They were not just making I Love Lucy anymore. They were producing other shows and managing sound stages and employing hundreds of people. Desi was the head of the company, and the pressure was immense. He dealt with that pressure by drinking more. The fights became more frequent and more vicious. Lucy and Desi would have explosive arguments that everyone on set knew about. They tried to keep things professional during filming, but the tension was obvious. The same chemistry that made them magical on screen came from a passion that also manifested as conflict. And here is what makes this even more tragic. Watch any episode of I Love Lucy, and you can see how much Lucy and Ricky Ricardo love each other. The looks they share, the way they make up after fights, the genuine affection in their physical comedy. That was not acting. Lucy and Desi really did love each other. That was part of what made the show so special. The love was real. But love is not always enough. Not when there is addiction and infidelity and resentment building up year after year. By 1956, the marriage was in serious trouble, and everyone around them knew it. The question was no longer whether it would end, but when. The show was still number 1. The audience had no idea what was happening. They tuned in every week to watch the Ricardos be happy. And Lucy kept performing, because that was what she did. She was a professional. She gave the audience what they wanted even when her personal life was falling apart. But she was also exhausted. 6 years of weekly production is brutal under any circumstances. 6 years of weekly production while your marriage is collapsing is almost impossible. Lucy was running on fumes and willpower, and the knowledge that millions of people were counting on her. Something had to give. And in 1957, Lucy made a decision that shocked the entire television industry. Part 3. Walking away from the top. Now we have to talk about what might be the bravest decision in television history, because Lucille Ball did something that nobody does. She walked away from the #1 show in America by choice. By 1957, I Love Lucy had been on the air for 6 seasons. It had produced 180 episodes. It had been #1 in the ratings for most of its run. The show was still incredibly popular. CBS would have kept it going for another decade. The audience wanted more. The network wanted more. Everyone wanted more. Everyone except Lucy. She announced that the 6th season would be the last for the weekly series. There would be no more Monday night episodes. I Love Lucy, as audiences knew it was ending. The final episode of the regular series aired on May 6, 1957. Why did she do it? There were several reasons, but they all connected to the same fundamental truth. Lucy could not keep pretending anymore. The marriage to Desi was beyond repair. They had tried counseling. They had tried separating. They had tried everything. Nothing worked. Desi kept drinking. Desi kept cheating. And Lucy kept suffering. Making a show every week about a happy marriage while living in a miserable one had become psychologically unbearable. But Lucy could not just announce to the world that her marriage was a disaster. That would have been scandalous in 1957.